Um, Welcome to Inside Class, where First Presbyterian's identity, faith, and values meets today's world. We're, of course, doing our Inside classes on Zoom and are recording them and putting them on the church's YouTube page for people to watch after the fact. We're currently in a series of classes related to social changes and how they affect aspects of our lives, different institutions. And a big topic, of course, is how social changes are affecting families, which is the topic of today's class. We're very fortunate to have Catherine Deming joining us. Catherine is a licensed mental health counselor. She has a master's in pastoral studies and is herself, we were just chatting before the class, Catherine and I, and has a blended family herself with 7 children. Between her and her husband have 7 children.
She and her husband.
Pardon?
She and her husband.
What did I say?
Her.
She and her husband, excuse me. She is in private practice with the Counseling Center of Iowa City. We have a hard stop at probably around 10 minutes of the hour, Catherine, but I want to say very much welcome. Thank you for joining us today, and I would look forward to your class.
Okay, thank you. So the first thing I want to say is I know Zoom is not ideal, but I'm awfully happy to have you here today because the last time I gave a talk, I was pretending that you were all there because I was talking to myself. And so this is a lot better to have you here. And some of you have been there when I've spoken before. Welcome back. And I guess I'm the one who's coming back anyway. But you may know that I really like people to share. And so if you have a question or if you have a comment, I do want you to jump in. Now, I want to tell you, and you probably know this already, if you unmute and talk, there will be a delay because I won't get that you're talking until after you really have started. So just be brave and go ahead and do jump in. So, and we're going to work with some questions in the end. So I know that you were thinking about the how society has changed in the 21st century, of course, and the effect on our everyday lives. And of course, our topic today is family. And I just thought I would start out with some definitions of family. And again, anybody can say anything. But when I was a kid, a family really meant mom, dad, and the kids. And now we've got a couple without children, and they can be married or cohabiting, or they can be the same or opposite sex, or they can have trans identities. And then there's a couple with children, and then there's multi-generational, so grandma or grandpa and the son or daughter, and then their children, or grandma and grandpa with the grandkids. And then there's something that we're now, well, we've been experiencing for a long time now, which is serial partnering. So people coming together, breaking up, repartnering, and adding more or different children. Then that you'd have adopted children, blood children, stepchildren, foster children, lots of children. Any other family definitions that you can think of or know of? That's a lot. Yeah. So that experience of the elderly parents with the children, their children, and the grandchildren is called the sandwich kind of relationship. So that this middle, the parents of the little kids taking care of elderly parents, they're sandwiched between the needs of the parent and the needs of the children. That can be a very stressful time. On the other hand, if the grandparents are taking care of the children, that tends to be very positive. And I certainly can understand that because I'd take those kids any day and have them. And then there's a difficulty that we're seeing with launching adult children finding a way to live on their own. Again, when I was growing up, you finished high school and you got your education, and then most people got married and had children, and that was it. But now there's kind of a boomerang thing where kids leave and then come back, often because of breakups or job loss, or they just can't afford housing. Many of these kids, as you know, have high student loans, and it's very difficult to meet all the financial needs, sometimes with the kinds of jobs that they can get. So they come back and then usually stabilize, and then they try again. I was thinking in our family, we had one daughter come back. She had a terrible job. She was fundraising in Ohio in 2008. And, you know, we had that, the terrible flood. And we were supposed to fly, and we flew or drove up to Cedar Rapids from Iowa City, and the airport was closed. So then we tried to drive on I-80 because we're going to go to Ohio. I was going to go with her and fly back, and the road was closed because the Cedar River had gone over the road. And so finally, I didn't go with her. She says, "No, I can do this." And she drove north just before the roads were closed in the Cedar Rapids area to Minnesota, and then drove over to Ohio. But when she got there, she discovered that the job wasn't what she thought, and she had to fundraise to make her own salary. And then what she made extra, or yeah, that would be the fundraising. Anyway, she came home for about a year, and then she got another job, and life has been good for her. We had a son and his girlfriend live with us for a year too. I think that's a common experience while they stabilize. And I have kind of a definition. A kid is launched when they have enough financial stability in their job to afford housing, and that they have insurance. So that seems to be the thing that the kids need to be able to be on their own. And something has come up about the age of adulthood. We say it's 18, and these kids get in so much trouble, like they're tried as adults at 18. But we had to raise the drinking age because they couldn't handle drinking. It was so bad at 18. So I just don't understand, if kids can't handle alcohol, why we make them responsible, because their brains are still developing. Until like 26, the brain is still developing. So anyway, some people say it's 18. The general consensus from the United States and Europe of people who are like working on this is about 25, that people are kind of grown up. I mean, kind of. So there's also a reference made to a generational divide. So between the baby boomers and the millennials, I don't think the baby boomers are aware of this, but I think the generational divide comes from the millennials toward the boomers who are kind of clueless, which is probably the problem. But millennials feel like their like birthright has been squandered because they see things like they don't have the opportunities that were available for the baby boomers. And like those who graduated from college in, would have been, let's see, 2006. I can't remember, whatever the Great Recession was, those kids are still struggling. And so there's an idea that the boomers didn't take care of the planet and didn't take care of the like Social Security and those kinds of things to hand it to the other kids, the next generation. So there's an ethic being put forward, which is enough and as good, that each generation has an obligation to leave behind enough for the next generation, and that it's at least as good. And I just don't think we've done that. So it's a good aspiration.
Catherine, I wonder if I could ask a question about the different
course.
kinds of family configurations. One thing that oftentimes people say is that you're modeling your parents or you're modeling the family that you grew up in as you become an adult in a family. And with all the different configurations of families, I wonder if that modeling is harder, because if you're, say, with a grandparent-led family with raising grandkids, it's hard to know what the models are when it's not the sort of traditional man, woman, kid. Do you see that in your practice?
Yeah, if there's a lot of disruption with the serial partnering thing, that is very, very difficult for children, because it's biological for children to attach, and so they just will attach to the person if they're with them for long enough. And then if there's a breakup and this person like disappears, then we begin to have a problem of the child being able to attach properly, or just being very discouraged and a little hopeless about that. I don't know about that they wouldn't be able to form a family, but I think it makes it harder. But family is very broadly defined, for sure. I think mostly if the caregiver, whoever that is, parent or grandma or foster parent, if the caregiver provides stability and warmth, connection, that's really the thing that will allow a kid to grow up and make their own attachments, no matter who it is in the home. Yeah. Anything else about that, anybody? Okay. Is that good? Is that okay, Matt?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
That was helpful.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so now what I haven't talked about yet, which is what I really do want to talk about, is the effects of the COVID virus on families. And also I want to name that in Iowa City, families have not only had, as you know, the difficulties of the COVID virus, but they have also had the derecho. Mm-hmm. And so, it's just one crisis, like long and, affecting everything on top of another. So that's a very big deal. And we know from research from World War II and from the Vietnam War and the Great Farm Crisis. I think it was 1995. I'm still sad about that. Anyway, we know from research from these times that the effects are long for families and then for the children. It doesn't just like go away when whatever crisis happened resolves. These things continue because there can be lasting damage, and that's the bad news. And so we're also going to today talk about resilience. But I wanted to say one statistic was that I read was that from the 9/11 attacks in New York, families report 60% of families reported distress among their children. 49% across the country, families reported distress among their children. So that was terrible. We all know that, but it was an event. And now these things that we've been experiencing, this has been more than a year now with COVID. So it is worrisome. So there are predictable stress processes that cascade through a family system itself, the whole family, through the subsystems. Okay, so the subsystems would be like one parent is a subsystem, each parent, each kid, and then there's the couple, and then there are the siblings, and then there's the family as a whole, and the family as a whole is like greater than the parts. But the way this happens is, and again, this stress model was developed out of studying the farm crisis. So the caregivers in the family, the parents, become stressed. And if there's enough stress, the parents become overwhelmed. And when that happens, they aren't coping. And so like the regular routines that they might have with the children, or the rituals that they might have, or their strong, compassionate, open-hearted parenting just starts not to happen. And we know that in particular, mothers can be less warm and more harsh, like discipline, like spanking. So the parents and fathers can too. Fathers can definitely become more oriented toward punishment than working with the children and having more understanding. And they just lose patience and lose perspective. And when that happens, it obviously affects the child. And so the children then can become themselves discouraged. But it doesn't usually present like that they're discouraged, because people could have more compassion usually toward discouragement or sadness. But a sad child usually presents as an angry child. And that's harder to deal with. That then becomes its own problem and increases the problems between the parent and the child, and a lot of conflict with the parents, between the parents. So now we have two stressed systems, children and parents. And then like even with these poor kids, like they can start to act out at home, they can act out at school, and they start to get in trouble at school, and then the parents get mad at them because they're in trouble at school. And this is the cascade. It's very interesting that siblings are a very important subsystem for the coping of both the parents and the children, that they provide their own support system. The older child actually helps with teaching the younger child skills of coping, skills of everyday life, just by being in relationship. And it's very good for the older child because they feel competent and the younger child develops. But when there's this fighting with the parents and when the parents aren't coping, then it starts to mirror in the sibs, and they start to act the same way and mirror that fighting, and then they don't have coping either, and so they're not providing that support that they normally would. So now this starts to create a lot of turmoil, and the whole family starts to not do well. And over time, you start to have other big problems like divorce, alcohol and drug problems with the parents. You can imagine over time with the children, and just the children are not learning this as they would and feeling good about themselves, and they start to not develop well. So that's the model of the difficulty with coping. And we know with COVID, we have social isolation. The grandparents are now not present. Now we're coming back because we're getting vaccinated, but we've had a year that parents have not had the support of their parents. The kids haven't had the loving kindness and patience of the grandparents and the friends who were helpful. So that isolation has been such a big deal. And then the routines of daily life are so stabilizing for children because they can count on it. They don't have to wonder, when are we going to eat? When do I go to bed? And that is anxiety producing for children. So that so much has changed, so much has been upended, like going to school. And then there's quarantine, and then the parents are not getting any breaks because so many of them are working from home, and then they're teachers. They have to like make sure that the children do their homework and try to be on task during school while they try to work. So I just thought I'd share in my own family. My daughter, Joanna, is a teacher, and she was needing to teach from home. And then her husband was no longer working outside the home. He was at home. And they have little children. They, when this started, they had a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old, and no daycare. And it was a nightmare. I mean, honestly, I know Joanna wouldn't mind. I mean, she and Isaac were starting not to get along. And they couldn't really do it, try to keep up. Then my other daughter, who was living in Pittsburgh, she got a fundraising job, which is so funny because she's the one who started up. We used to, that came home from that terrible job. We used to tease her that she was going door to door with a little cup asking for money. But she's graduated. She's doing big time stuff now. But anyway, she got a good job, and she left Pennsylvania just as like the roads were closing again. What is this? But my other daughter, younger daughter, Joanna, invited her to come and live with them, with the little kids, until she got settled. And that worked so well for them because Mary Cheryl did not know anybody in Chicago except my daughter and other daughter, Joanna. And so she now had a family to be with. And she was another parent, honestly, because she just pitched in. She'd, get up with them if they, wanted to. She cooked and she cleaned and she took her turn. All three of them took their turns with the children so they could all work. And that was a wonderful answer to a problem for all of them in this time. But not everybody has those kinds of things available. And so I just feel that there's so much suffering among people. And then you throw the derecho on top of that, and what are they going to do? So that's all hard. And I just want to have some room for everybody to be able to take a little time. If there's anything you want to share about your experience with all of this, this is a good time to do that. And then I'll talk about resilience after that. Okay,
Well,
Chuck, go
I'll
ahead.
try, man.
Good.
So I worked at Foundation 2 for probably 32 years, and then I worked at Tanager before it was Tanager for 4 years. So these are near and dear issues, and from the back end of it, the Cedar Rapids school system, we already had kids that were behind, minority kids, kids with IEPs and English language learners. So the derecho made it worse. And so now, and regardless of this, I think they're looking at that kids on course, 800 to 900 kids, which is mind blowing. I mean, there's 16,000 kids in the school district, and then have that, I don't know the data, but that's unbelievable number of kids in that summer school program they want to have, and they still even need maybe help for these first and second graders who really took a hit tutoring. So, and I know the president of the school board would say it also takes the community, so everybody has to be involved in this effort. Yeah, but my point is the teachers kind of take a hit to me, a breakdown, and this is near and dear to my heart, the breakdown of the family. And so at Foundation 2, if you had a kid that come in there and have both biological parents, that's an anomaly. That's an outlier. Now, I've been divorced many years ago, so I've been through that. But my point is the tragedy and the breakdown of values is whoever was involved with that child being born, they're not involved anymore. And the payoffs, and for healthy kids, there's really a price to pay for that, not having the biological parent, and that has to be. But the tragedy is biological parents not taking responsibility for part of that life is all I'm saying, and having a strong mentor, whether grandparent, a coach, a step parent, which is fine. Right. But it's almost a cliche, but I'll say it till when I'm 70 years old, the breakdown of the family is the bottom, and the schools and the police and the prisons and everybody, we pay for that, and pain and suffering, and economically we pay for it, in so many dimensions. But my North Star is how do we strengthen that family unit? Because otherwise we're just playing catch up. Mm-hmm. And we need all these other resources to play catch up, because that's how I made a living for many years. But it's still, if you want to look at solving the problem, the front end, how do we strengthen those parents who raise those kids and give them the resources, So anyway, but my big thing is parents that have kids should have some responsibility raising them, even if they're not married to that person. Is all I'm saying, and plus they suffer financially too. Single parents have a much harder, and that's another big problem, economic in and of itself, let alone emotionally. So it's a big task, but I guess we got to keep pushing it. So
yeah, no, what a good point you make. And actually, it's very important. I'm so glad you said it, because I didn't say it. So I've talked about this stuff coming down, like the COVID and derecho, but already there is an underlying problem for so many families, suffering from discrimination, suffering from outright racism, suffering from low paying jobs. And so parents are both working and they can't make it. So, and some mental health problems, or if there's a child who has some mental or physical problems, that the family starts out stressed. But the other thing is, it goes back to Matt, your point and your question, because my concern, as you bring this up, Leland, that it's the responsibility of these parents who have brought into this world children, and that is ideal. But from my work, what I see is when there have been breaks in those attachments for a child already, and then they grow up, those attachments are not strong. And so we have people who aren't very well able to take care of their children because of what happened to them when they were children. And so we begin to have multi-generational trauma. And poverty itself is a multi-generational trauma that creates that stress model that we talked about. And then you see how nobody does well. They have nothing to cope with. So, there's one of my professors at Iowa, when I was getting my counseling degree, said that she was involved in a study that if you paid people enough money, and I would say if you paid people what it costs to imprison them, people would have a good living. But she said if people got a decent job with a decent wage, everything bad about our society gets better. Alcohol use, drug use, domestic violence, everything gets better. And so I know that seems simple, but that was the study. So that we just have you're right, Leland, we have to find ways to strengthen that family. But one thing that you guys are all involved with is church. And church is a great support for families if the church supports families. And most of them do. So you're doing something so important. And also your continuing ed is so important because you're still trying to think and make change in the world. So I want to take some time now, and you're very welcome to come in here with a comment or a question. But there is family resilience, and this is also so important. And I want to talk for a moment about what I talked about during my last talk with the First Presbyterian Insight series, which was I was talking about like mental health and finding a way to cope. I don't know that was the topic, but that's what I talked about. And one of the things that I had mentioned in that talk was that we all actually have the capacity to cope. The problem is that people don't always know it. And even if someone has significant ADHD, which is, if it's not treated, it's very difficult. Coping becomes very difficult, but a person can learn. And because you can have something hard happen, but you always have a choice about how you are going to respond to that. And so when I was a single mom, I used to say, I can do all this stuff, or I can be upset and do all this stuff, but I'm going to do all this stuff. And it was really helpful. And so one of the ways that we can help families is just by modeling coping, showing people that it's possible and bringing that warmth. to like generally. Anyway, that is one resilient thing, is having positivity, being cheerful, being playful, seeing the positive. That's a resilience trait. And these have like categories. There's communication. And so you provide clear information for the children and for your spouse or your partner. And actually, we can see this same resilience on a national level. When the communication to the country about COVID began to be clear, it was a whole lot easier than when they didn't know enough to tell us exactly, well, we think, well, we did think that, but now we think this. And that really threw people. But when the communication is clear, everybody settles down. And then there's emotional sharing, like I'm really worried, or that isn't what I wanted, or anyway, you understand. Just letting people, it's like normal to share your feelings. You get to do that and you get to be validated. Collaborative problem solving, that includes the children. Like a family meeting, we have this problem, kids, we need this. What are your ideas? Or, mom has to go back to work. What are we going to do? How are we going to solve this problem? So collaborative problem solving. And then this is what I started out with, partner and family coping. Just outright, you don't lose your patience. You don't lose your perspective, because you know that you don't have to do that. You have a choice otherwise. So then the second category is organization. And that doesn't mean like putting things in order, but more family processes. And that's adaptability. So you're not rigid about things, or it must be this way. It should. Anytime you say should, I want everybody to think that's a mirage. There's no should. It's very helpful just to think, okay, let's what are we dealing with here? Adaptability. And also, like, adaptability is like with the children, like saying yes to everything you can say yes to. Like, try to think, why not? Why not? Like, slide down the stairs on a mattress, like, I don't know, whatever. Why not? And so you say yes. And so the children are happy. The children feel supported. But, bless you. But when you say no, your no is very meaningful. When that no is very important, and you stand by the no. But if it doesn't happen that often, you can do that. And the kids are also more connected to you. That's another thing, is connectedness, which is the we. We are doing this. We're doing this together. There's a sense of community and belonging in the family. And people feel that, and they feel supported in that. And then there's access to social and economic resources. That is part of resilience too. When people don't have that, it's very hard to be resilient. And then the third category is meaning making. So somehow finding a way to understand what is going on. You process it, and you process it according to the developmental level of the children. And so, my daughter in Chicago with the children talked to her daughter about bad germs. The bad germs are here, so that's why all these things are happening. And at 4, she could take that in. And you can, that meaning making is like providing a framework within which the children can understand what's happening. And so you want to give them and yourselves the idea that this is not forever. And that's true. That it's manageable. You have to model that. And you're not giving anybody the worst case scenario, because nobody actually needs that. It might not happen, so we're not going to go there. Let's see. Oh, this one's very important. That there is a shared sense of family agency. In other words, we can handle this. Like, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to do this together? And that is very hard to manage when you have COVID and then you have, your house destroyed. That sense of this is manageable. But it is possible to bring that belief and that courage to the family so that people can buy it. And even in the worst feelings and the worst case, it's like, okay, because we're still together, and because we can call the insurance, we hope, And I would say you can do these things even if terrible things happen, like let's say the family becomes homeless. You still can say, we're still a family. And that we have a place to go. We have somewhere to go. We are still a family. It takes a lot of courage and fortitude in that kind of situation. And providing hope. That's the optimism, providing hope. And a sense of spirituality. And that doesn't have to be religious, but religious spirituality is so powerful and so helpful. But it can be a sense of like beauty or truth or goodness or nature, something that's bigger than us, that we tap into all that. So, there are a lot of ideas here that I just brought up, but we're getting close to the end. And I just want to know if you all have experiences with these kinds of things, or if you have any comments or questions that you want to bring up. I'd love to hear how you are using some of these things. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention, because actually it wasn't in the list, but is self-care. Self-care models self-esteem to children, and also helps you provide what they need. So I'm going to stop for a minute and give you some room to share if you'd like to now.
One of the things that's actually helped me in this year, when I've been I already told you about my knee, Catherine. I didn't tell you about the prostate cancer I've been dealing with for the last 15 months.
So sorry, Tom.
One of the things that's actually helped me through all of this is the knowledge that I'm not missing out because nobody else can do anything either.
Right.
So yeah, it's a big boat we're in, but you're all in it with me.
Right, that's so true. See, there's the we-ness. It's not just in the family, it's in the community, or it's in the church. That's wonderful.
One of the things I've noticed during the pandemic is how my children have stepped in to parent my husband and me to be sure we're safe, that we follow the rules, that we don't get, especially with the derecho, take away the chainsaw. It's it's been nice, and I don't begrudge them. I don't think I need parenting all the time, but it's nice they care.
Yes.
I was going to throw in that we have our youngest son has lifetime of issues with anxiety and just stress, and I think ADHD and all kinds of things. And as we've all been sort of stuck here, the three of us together, especially Matt, who's working from home, and Ben, who is a student at Kennedy High School, which was closed for even longer than, and then the whole online school. And anyway, you Catherine outlined the stressors on him and on the family system just perfectly. And this is a very fortunate family situation, you know. None of those what in my training in school would be ACEs, which basically is life stressors or life traumas. It's still been just an anxious time. And but one of the things that there are some things that have helped in that. The siblings, we have two older children who have, like Cindy said, sort of stepped in and are providing some supports for him. Also, the youth group and just continuing to have resources at church that are supportive. And then the one that I think never always could have happened, but wouldn't have happened had it not been for the pandemic, is a renewed sort of connection with his grandmother, who lives in Virginia, but North Carolina. They, because of the pandemic and because people were at home, I guess, I don't know, she just put it upon herself to have a standard time every week where she reaches out to the grandchildren that she's not able to see. So Thursday at 4 p.m. she calls Ben every week. And, you know, that's a little silver lining
Yes.
of the pandemic that I hope is one of the things that carries on post-pandemic. I think
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wonderful. Yeah.
Every Thursday at 4:30, we Zoom with my brother, who's been in a nursing home for several years with Parkinson's. And it's we four girls. There are 5 children in the family, and then any of his children that can join us. And it's been marvelous for him, because obviously being in a nursing home, he has been unable to have guests, and has been unable to get out and everything. So we're hoping this continues to help him.
Yes. That's lovely. Yeah. We have, there have been several things. I love Zoom and I love FaceTime with my grandchildren. It's so fun. The little ones carry me around with the phone, you know. The little 1-year-old kept putting me in a cabinet yesterday. Anyway, I love it, and I'm so grateful for it, because we've not been able to see them. And we have friends in Scotland that are dear, dear, dear friends, and we just wouldn't see them, but we've discovered Zoom. We now talk like every couple weeks. It's just wonderful. Who would know? Yeah. And Cynthia, I just wanted to say, my children are also parenting me. Like, whatever, like, no, Mom, you're not doing that. What? I thought I was, but no, I guess I'm not. So they do care. And I feel like I'm just getting back what I gave. You know, they're like telling me what to do, so it's okay. So, anybody else before we close? I think we're going to have to close in a minute.
we probably ought to wrap up, Catherine.
Okay, all right.
But hey, thanks very much for joining us today. And I'll just mention next week, Dr. Ghosh, a prominent oncologist in town, will be joining us for Insight class. Thank you again,
Oh,
Catherine.
you're so welcome. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye.
all.
Thanks, Matt.